In the sprawling, restless city of Los Angeles lived a young woman named Aria Hartley. To the wealthy patrons she served at Langford's upscale Italian restaurant and the hurried crowd she navigated, she was nearly invisible, just another girl in a black server's vest moving between candlelit tables with practiced silence. She blended into the marble columns and soft jazz, her hand steady as she cleared wine glasses from the private booths in the back dining room where men in $1,000 suits conducted business she pretended not to hear. 8 months she had been invisible there. 8 months of double shifts, of moving through that restaurant like a ghost, like a shadow that refused to leave. Her car was parked in a lot 3 blocks away that did not ask questions about overnight sleeping. Her possessions fit into a backpack worn at the seams, 2 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, a bar of soap so old it had cracked down the middle, and the one thing she would not abandon, her grandmother's recipe book, its pages filled with handwritten notes in margins so crowded they looked like prayers. Her mornings began in gas station bathrooms where she washed the night shift grime from her skin with paper towels and water that came out too hot or too cold, never in between. She counted the pennies in her apron pocket, on a good night, maybe $8 in tips. On a bad night, nothing. On the night 3 weeks ago when a businessman grabbed her wrist and told her she was useless, she earned $0. Today she had exactly $78 in the world. $78 to stretch for 6 more days until her next paycheck. But that was not the real pressure. The real pressure lived in her backpack alongside the recipe book, a printed email she had read so many times the creases were wearing through the paper. The landlord wanted $35,000. Not rent. Not a deposit. $35,000 by the end of 2 weeks, or her mother's old apartment would be foreclosed on completely. The bank was taking it back. The life she had been trying to save was being erased by numbers on a screen. She did not cry about it. Her tears had dried up somewhere on a Greyhound bus 5 years ago when she realized no one was coming to help. The lemon-polish smell of Langford's marble floors filled her nose as she moved through the back dining room. The soft clink of silverware on plates. The low murmur of conversation that she was trained to hear without listening. Her black vest hung loose on her shoulders now. She had been skipping lunch to save money for the apartment that was slipping away. The weight of her apron pockets held tips, yes, but also the constant, crushing knowledge that $78 divided by 6 days meant $12 per day for food. For gas. For everything. This was her life. The invisible spaces between other people's comfort. Tuesday evening. The dinner rush. The foyer of Langford's filled with arriving guests, women in silk dresses, men shaking off the November cold. Aria emerged from the kitchen with a tray of water glasses balanced on her palm, moving through the crowd with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. The main staircase curved up from the center of the dining room, marble, imposing, a design choice meant to make guests feel small in the best way, humble in the presence of beauty. That was where it happened. A child's scream. Not loud. Not quite a scream yet, but the sharp intake of breath before one comes. Aria's head turned without her choosing to turn it, her body recognizing danger before her mind did. At the top of the marble staircase, a little girl in a velvet dress, dark curls, pale skin, maybe 7 years old, had caught her heel on the top step. Her arms windmilled. The tray of champagne glasses she had been carrying fell first, exploded against the stairs in a cascade of crystal and sparkling liquid. The girl came next. Aria did not think. She dropped her water glasses, they shattered against the restaurant floor with a sound like breaking teeth, and moved forward. Not ran. Moved. A clean, direct line through the crowd of arriving guests. 3 strides. 4. The child was falling down marble stairs that had no forgiveness, and Aria was beneath her, arms up, catching. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs. The child's weight, small as it was, drove her backward 3 steps until her spine hit the wall. Emma Bianchi was pressed against Aria's chest, trembling. The child's arms wrapped around Aria's neck with the desperation of someone who had just learned how fast the world could hurt. Around them, the restaurant froze. Heads turned. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. The sound of ice clinking in glasses became unbearably loud in the silence. And then, on Aria's shoulder blade, exactly where the trembling child could reach, 3 quick taps. Tap! 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 A rescue signal. The universal signal for help. Emma had learned it at school, in a safety seminar her mother had insisted on. When you are in danger and you cannot speak, you tap 3 times. Aria felt it but did not understand what it meant. "Thank you," the child whispered, her voice like breaking glass. "Thank you. Thank you." Across the dining room, in the corner booth where he always sat, a man rose from his chair. Not quickly. Deliberately. Each movement controlled. He was tall, 6'1", with shoulders that seemed to take up more space than anyone else's shoulders had the right to take, and he moved through the restaurant like a general surveying a battlefield. His suit was charcoal gray, tailored so precisely that every seam looked like a calculation. His shirt was open at the collar, showing the chest of a man who had survived things that should have broken him. His eyes were dark, the kind of dark that held no light. A thin scar ran from the outside corner of his left eye down to his jaw, silver in the candlelight. Giovanni Bianchi. The room knew before anyone spoke a word. The way the waiters stiffened. The way the businessman at the nearest table suddenly found his plate very interesting. The way the ambient noise of the restaurant, the jazz, the conversation, the clink of silverware, seemed to dim, as if the room itself was holding its breath. He walked toward her slowly. His men, Marco, the one with the broken nose, and Franco, the one with the gold rings on both hands, did not follow. They watched. Everyone watched. Aria was still holding his daughter. "She is safe," Aria said. The words came out barely a whisper. She did not know who this man was, but she recognized power. It was written in the way he moved. In the way the room bent toward him. "She is safe. She is not hurt." Giovanni Bianchi looked at his daughter's face buried in the neck of a girl in a black server's vest. He looked at the curve of Aria's shoulders, protectively angled. He looked at her calloused hands, the hands of someone who washed dishes and cleared tables for survival. He looked at the worn fabric of her apron. And something moved behind his eyes. Something ancient and dangerous and, for just a moment, unbearably vulnerable. "Thank you," he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. "What is your name?" "Aria," she said. "Aria Hartley." He nodded once. His daughter clung tighter to her neck. And in that moment, in the candlelit dining room of Langford's, surrounded by people pretending not to watch, neither of them knew that everything was about to change. Neither of them knew that 3 days later, Aria would find an envelope slipped under her car's windshield wiper blade, and inside that envelope would be a business card with a single number written on the back. Neither of them knew that her invisible life was about to collide with a world so dangerous that safety itself would become a weapon. The broken champagne glasses on the stairs glittered like scattered stars. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now let us go back to the beginning, to understand how a girl with $78 and a grandmother's recipe book ended up holding the daughter of the man who controlled half the city's underground empire. 3 weeks before the broken champagne glasses scattered across the marble stairs, Aria Hartley sat in a Shell gas station bathroom at 5:47 in the morning, washing her face with water so cold it felt like punishment. The fluorescent lights hummed above her, casting everything in a sickly white that made the bruise on her collarbone look darker than it was. She had stopped asking how it got there. Douglas Hale's fingers left marks like signatures, and she had learned not to flinch when he passed her in the kitchen. Flinching made it worse. She pulled her waitress uniform from her backpack, black pants, black shirt, so worn the fabric had thinned to transparency at the seams. The apron came next, crisp and white, a costume of respectability that meant nothing. She changed in a bathroom stall barely wide enough to turn around, balancing on one foot, pressing her spine against the cold metal divider. Her wallet sat on the sink. $78. Everything she had left after her last paycheck went to car insurance and the storage unit on Figueroa Street, the one that held everything her grandmother had owned before the dementia took her. The recipe book was wrapped in a plastic bag, protected like it was made of glass instead of paper and leather. Her grandmother's handwriting filled the margins, not just ingredients but stories. Instructions for living. Aria had read some of them 100 times, searching for wisdom in flour measurements and cooking times. She looked at herself in the mirror. 26 years old but looking closer to 40. Eyes that had forgotten how to be surprised. Skin that had gone pale from sleeping in a car instead of sunlight. She straightened her apron and left the bathroom. The Honda Civic was parked in the back corner of the Shell lot, where the security cameras did not quite reach. It was her home. The back seat folded down, and she had covered the interior with blankets that smelled like detergent and old gasoline. She kept her belongings in a duffel bag, 2 extra uniforms, underclothes, toiletries in a pencil case. The recipe book went under the driver's seat, wrapped in plastic, protected like it was the only valuable thing she still owned. She sat in the driver's seat for exactly 10 minutes before starting the engine. This was her routine. 10 minutes of silence before the world demanded she become invisible again. Langford's restaurant occupied a corner lot in downtown Los Angeles, wrapped in floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the city back at itself. Inside, everything was candlelight and cream-colored linen. The marble staircase curved from the ground floor to a private dining area upstairs, and soft Italian music played constantly, something classical that Aria could never quite identify. The air smelled like garlic and fresh basil and money. She arrived at 6:43, which meant she had time to clock in before the dinner service began at 7. The back kitchen was all stainless steel and heat, with cooks moving like dancers in a choreography they had perfected 1,000 times. The head chef barely glanced at her as she tied her apron tighter. Douglas Hale found her in the service station exactly 4 minutes later. He was in his mid-40s, with slicked back hair that never moved and cologne so strong it announced him before he entered a room. He had owned Langford's for 6 years, though Sophie Langford, the owner's daughter, managed the front of house and made most of the decisions that mattered. Douglas simply managed the staff. He managed Aria. His hand came to rest on the small of her back, his fingers splayed just wide enough to be threatening. "You're on the back room tonight," he said. His voice was like oil, slick and dark. "And smile more. The customers like it when you smile." She nodded without speaking. His touch lingered for 1 second too long before he moved past her. The back dining room was where the important people sat today. The private booths. The transactions that happened in the spaces between courses. Aria had learned to move through this room like a ghost, present but not seen, there but not acknowledged. She had learned to notice nothing. To speak only when spoken to. To keep her eyes down and her hand steady. Sophie Langford was already at the host stand, checking reservations. She wore a dress that probably cost more than Aria's monthly rent if she paid rent anywhere but the Honda Civic. Sophie was in her early 30s, with blonde hair cut into angles that suggested purpose, and she looked at Aria the way most people looked at stains, as problems that needed removing. "Aria," Sophie said, not looking up from her reservation book. "Try not to spill wine on anyone important tonight. Some people just don't understand professional presentation." She said it loud enough for the other servers to hear. Loud enough for Aria to feel the weight of it, the specific targeting of the words. Sophie had started a rumor 2 weeks ago that Aria was stealing from the register. The rumor had spread through the staff like a virus. No one had confronted her directly. Instead, they simply watched her more carefully, stood farther away, turned their conversations into silence when she approached. There were no witnesses to theft, because there was no theft. But there was no evidence of innocence either. In Sophie's world, that was the same thing as guilt. The back room filled slowly as the evening deepened. By 8 o'clock, the booths were full with men in expensive suits, women in dresses that caught the light. The tables were staggered far enough apart that conversations could not be overheard, and the private booths had high backs that created small islands of invisibility. In the corner booth, the one that always remained reserved for Tuesday and Thursday nights, Giovanni Bianchi sat with his espresso untouched and his wine barely sipped. He had been coming to Langford's for 8 months, always the same booth, always the same meal. Osso buco. Barolo wine. Espresso. He always tipped exactly 20% in cash. Aria had served him 3 times, the first occasion being the most recent, when the regular server called in sick and Sophie had assigned his table to her with a smile that contained no kindness. She had approached his booth with her notepad steady, her voice level, her eyes on the reservation book instead of his face. He was in his early 40s, she thought, though it was difficult to know for certain. His hair was dark and graying at the temples, threaded with silver like a river running through stone. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him like it had been carved for his body alone, and his hands were resting on the table with the casual dominance of someone who had never needed to prove his strength. One hand bore a thin gold watch. The other carried a scar that ran from his knuckle to his wrist, old and pale and speaking of a violence that had long since healed. His eyes missed nothing. She had felt them tracking her movements as she poured water, as she described the evening's specials, as she took his order and repeated it back to him. His 2 men sat at the adjacent table, both built like monuments, both watching everything with the particular attentiveness of people whose job was to notice threats before they materialized. She did not know his name. She did not need to know his name. She had learned long ago that knowing too much about customers was a liability. Knowledge was connection, and connection was vulnerability, and vulnerability was how Douglas Hale justified his hands on her throat. That was how things were on Tuesday, August 18th, at 8:37 in the evening. 20 minutes later, everything changed. The hostess was seating a party of 12 near the entrance, which meant the front door was opening and closing constantly, letting in the August heat. Emma Bianchi had arrived for dinner with her father, a rare occurrence, one that his men had prepared for with the seriousness of a military operation. She was 7 years old, with her father's dark curls and his dark eyes, wearing a dress that probably cost more than Aria's car. Children were not common in Langford's. Children represented vulnerability, and vulnerability was something Giovanni Bianchi did not usually permit in his world. But Emma had asked to come to dinner with him, and there was apparently nothing in his empire that mattered more than the word no not being spoken to his daughter. She was curious. Aria noticed this as Emma stood at her father's table, eyes moving across the room, cataloguing details the way children do, the way the light fell through the windows, the way the servers moved, the way the adults around her spoke in voices that were never quite honest. Emma had been reading books about safety at school. Books with pictures of children in danger and arrows pointing to exits. One assembly had taught them about signals. 3 quick taps meant help me. 3 taps that nobody would notice. 3 taps that meant I am in danger and I need someone to know. She practiced the signal sometimes when she could not sleep, tapping against her pillow, tapping against the walls of the mansion on Pacific Palisades, testing to see if anyone would come. Nobody ever came. Her father had guards and drivers and men who would die for him, but he could not protect her from the loneliness of being his daughter. He could not tap back through the walls. Emma wandered away from the table while her father was speaking to Marco. The hostess was busy with the large party near the entrance. Sophie Langford was checking on a VIP table in the front dining room. Nobody was watching the child as she moved toward the marble staircase, drawn by the curve of it, the way it spiraled upward into mystery. Her foot caught on the edge of the bottom step. The fall happened in the space of a heartbeat. Emma's body angling forward, her hands reaching for something solid, her eyes widening with the surprise of a child who had always been caught before. The staircase was marble and unforgiving. The edge was sharp. Aria was moving before her mind caught up with her body. She was crossing the dining room in 3 quick strides, her hands already reaching, already positioned to catch before the impact happened. Emma collided with her chest, small and fragile, and Aria absorbed the weight of her with the force of someone who had spent her entire life holding things together. The child's arms locked around her neck. Her small fingers dug into Aria's shoulders. And 3 times, quick and sharp and deliberate, Emma tapped against Aria's shoulder blade. Tap, tap, tap. Help me. Aria froze. She understood, in that moment, that this child was not tapping because she had fallen. She was tapping because something in her body recognized what Aria had learned not to recognize, that there was another person here who understood the language of needing help. Who recognized the signal? Giovanni Bianchi reached them in seconds. He moved like water finding its own level, inevitable and fluid, and when he wrapped his arms around his daughter, it was with the tenderness of a man who had built an empire so that no one would ever hurt her. So that she would never need to tap signals into the dark. "Are you hurt, Piccola?" His voice was soft, softer than anything Aria had heard from him in her 3 previous encounters. "Are you hurt, my love?" Emma shook her head, still clinging to Aria's neck. She did not let go. She simply clung tighter, and Aria realized, with a certainty that moved through her like ice water, that this child had felt something in her that she recognized as safe. Emma had tapped for help, and Aria had answered. Giovanni's eyes met Aria's for the first time with real attention. Not the cursory acknowledgement of a customer noticing a server. This was different. This was the gaze of a man who had just learned something about this girl that he needed to know. "Thank you," he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. "You caught her. You did not hesitate." Aria nodded. The words came out smaller than she intended. "She's okay. I think she just stumbled. The steps are steep, Anne." Douglas Hale appeared, his face arranged in an expression of false concern. "Mr. Bianchi, I am so sorry. We'll get someone to. The girl should have been supervised more carefully. I apologize." Giovanni did not acknowledge him. He was looking at Aria, and his daughter was whispering something against his shoulder. He listened, his jaw tightening, and then he looked back at Aria with an expression that she could not quite read. "What is your name?" he asked. "Aria," she said. "Aria Hartley." Giovanni nodded once, slowly, as if he was committing the name to memory. His daughter clung to him now, safe in his arms, but her eyes never left Aria's face. She held Aria's gaze with the seriousness of a child who had just found something precious and was terrified it might disappear. Emma whispered something else to her father, her words hidden in the space between them, and Giovanni listened with the full weight of his attention. When he pulled back enough to look at her face, his expression had shifted into something harder. Something that contained anger, though not at Emma, and not at Aria. Something that moved through him like a storm gathering on the horizon. He set Emma down gently and took her hand. "We are going to sit now," he said to her. "And we are going to have a nice dinner. And you are safe. You are always safe." But as he led his daughter back toward the booth, he looked at Aria once more. His eyes held a question that she could not answer, a recognition that something had passed between them in the moment when his daughter had fallen and Aria had moved without thinking. What Aria did not know was that Emma had told her father about the taps. About the rescue signal she had learned at school. About how when she was falling, when she was afraid, this stranger had caught her not with the reflexive grab of someone doing their job, but with the absolute certainty of someone who understood what it meant to fall and have no one there to catch you. Emma had told him that Aria had felt like safety. And in a world where Giovanni Bianchi controlled empires and legions of men and the flow of money through half the city's underground, nothing mattered more than the fact that his 7-year-old daughter had found someone who knew what it meant to be afraid and had answered anyway. The rain hammered against the restaurant windows like fists demanding entry. Aria Hartley stood in the back dining room of Langford's, clearing plates from a corner booth, her movements precise and invisible as they had been for 8 months. Her turtleneck clung to her skin despite the summer heat, sleeves pulled down to her wrists. A bruise the color of storm clouds wrapped her throat, hidden but not invisible to anyone who looked closely. She did not expect anyone to look closely. She was the kind of person eyes slid past. But at the entrance to the kitchen, Giovanni Bianchi stood motionless, watching her with the full weight of his attention. His frame filled the doorway, 6'2", shoulders broad beneath a charcoal suit that cost more than Aria's monthly rent, dark hair swept back from a face carved from granite and shadows. A scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone like a blade had once tried to cut him in half and failed. Gold watch catching the candlelight. The kind of man who made lieutenants exchange nervous glances just by existing in a room. Marco and Franco materialized behind him, their hands twitching toward jackets that held weapons and authority in equal measure. Aria felt their presence before she saw them. Her body went rigid. Every survival instinct she had cultivated through years of invisibility screamed at her to keep working, to remain inconsequential, to become the kind of background fixture that dangerous men did not notice. Too late. Giovanni crossed the dining room without haste, each step deliberate and controlled. The other diner sensed the shift in air, not aggressive, but heavy with intent. Conversation softened. Forks paused mid-bite. When Giovanni Bianchi moved through a room, the room itself held its breath. He stopped 3 feet from where Aria stood holding a stack of plates. Aria. Just her name. Not a question. Not a greeting. An acknowledgement that she existed, which meant she could no longer disappear. She turned slowly, keeping her gaze on the plates in her hands. Her voice came out barely audible, a whisper wrapped in fear. Mr. Bianchi. Can I get you something? Look at me. It was not a request. The tone suggested it had never occurred to him that someone would refuse. Aria lifted her eyes reluctantly. She had seen him exactly 3 times in 8 months, always at this corner booth, always with men in expensive suits discussing things in voices too low to hear. She had learned not to wonder about those conversations. Wondering was how invisible people became visible. Visible was how they disappeared. His gaze traveled across her face with methodical precision, cataloging details, the exhaustion beneath her eyes, the way her left hand trembled slightly, the edge of a bruise visible above her collar where no turtleneck could completely conceal the shape of fingers. When his eyes met hers, something shifted in his expression. A flicker of recognition. A door opening onto a memory he kept locked. How long has this been happening? His voice dropped lower, carrying weight like a thunderstorm rolling across distant hills. I don't know what you mean. Your throat. The fear. How long? Aria's hands tightened around the plates. I'm fine. Just clumsy. Giovanni stepped closer. Not threatening, he never raised his voice, never needed to. The space between them felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. I grew up with men who hurt women and called it devotion. My mother had a mark on her throat that looked exactly like the one you are hiding. When I was old enough to understand what it meant, I swore that when I had power, I would never ignore it. So I ask you again. How long? Behind him, Marco and Franco exchanged a look that had no name. In 15 years, they had never heard Giovanni Bianchi ask personal questions. Never heard him speak about his mother, whose grave he visited in silence on the anniversary of her death. Never seen his hand move to Aria's arm with something that resembled gentleness. I can't, Aria began, but her voice fractured like old glass. You can. Giovanni's hand dropped away, but his attention remained locked on her. Tell me his name. If I do, I lose this job. I lose everything. I have $78 to my name. 78. And I need $35,000 in 2 weeks for an apartment deposit before winter comes and the homeless shelters fill up. I can't afford to lose anything. The restaurant seemed to pause. Even the rain against the windows fell silent, as if the city itself was listening. Giovanni's jaw tightened. Something ancient and dangerous stirred behind his eyes, not directed at her, but at the world that had backed her into a corner where she had to choose between safety and survival. His name, he repeated, not as a request but as inevitability. Douglas Hale. He's the manager. Giovanni nodded slowly, and Marco already had his phone in hand, already typing. The machine of his power was moving before Aria had finished speaking. By morning, there would be a file on Douglas Hale's desk, every debt he owed, every secret he kept, every weakness in his carefully constructed life laid bare. Giovanni Bianchi did not tolerate violence against women. He had made that policy clear to his organization years ago. But he tolerated it far less when the woman in question had caught his daughter when she fell, had held Emma like she was something precious, had moved with the instinct of someone who understood what it meant to need saving. "You will not lose your job," Giovanni said quietly. "And you will have your deposit." Aria shook her head, backing away. "I can't take your money." "I won't be. It is not charity. My daughter trusts you. That is rare enough that I choose to honor it. You protected her when you did not have to. This is me returning the favor." Behind him, Franco whispered something to Marco. Marco's response came back just as quiet. "He's never done anything like this. Not in all the years I've known him." A flash of lightning split the sky outside, followed immediately by thunder that rattled the windows. The storm was moving closer. The pressure in the air felt like it was building toward something inevitable, some collision between worlds that could not occupy the same space. Aria stood frozen, the stack of plates still in her hands. "If I accept this, if I let you in, and then you disappear like everyone else." "I will not disappear," Giovanni said, and the certainty in his voice was absolute. It carried no room for doubt, no hedging, no possibility of negotiation. "But we need to talk somewhere private." "Not here. Not where Douglas Hale can see us." The kitchen door swung open and Douglas emerged, his face tightening when he saw Giovanni standing beside Aria. He tried to approach with false familiarity, his hand reaching out for a greeting that would never come. Giovanni's stare froze him mid-step. The message was silent and complete: "Touch her again and you will learn what it means to disappear." Douglas retreated into the kitchen, understanding passing between them without a single word being spoken. Giovanni turned back to Aria. "Tomorrow. Noon. There is a park 3 blocks from here. The one with the fountain. Come alone." He turned and walked back toward his booth, Marco and Franco following like shadows with substance. The restaurant exhaled. Forks resumed their movement. Conversations tentatively returned. But the air had changed. Something had shifted from the invisible to the impossible to ignore. Aria stood holding plates that had grown cold, her hand shaking enough that she had to set them down on the nearest table before they fell. Through the kitchen window, she could see Douglas watching her with an expression that looked like calculation mixed with rage. He had seen Giovanni standing close to her. He had understood the implication. And something in his eyes suggested that he was already planning how to remind her that she belonged to him, not to some mafia boss with enough power to make men vanish. Outside, the storm intensified. Rain fell in sheets now, obscuring the parking lot, turning the city into something darker and more dangerous. The temperature had dropped 10 degrees in minutes. Aria felt it even through the restaurant's air conditioning, the way the air felt like it was tightening, like the sky was holding its breath before release. She finished her shift on autopilot, moving through the dining room with even more care than usual, hyper-aware of Douglas watching from the kitchen, of the corner booth where Giovanni had sat reading the evening news as if he had not just upended her entire existence. When she clocked out, she walked to her 2004 Honda Civic in the employee parking lot, her backpack slung over her shoulder containing everything that mattered: 2 changes of clothes, toiletries she washed and reused, and wrapped carefully in plastic at the very bottom, her grandmother's recipe book. The pages were yellowed, the binding held together with tape and prayer. In the margins, her grandmother had written notes in careful cursive: encouragement, wisdom, love disguised as kitchen advice. Aria sat in her car in the pouring rain, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to decide if what had just happened was salvation or the beginning of a trap she did not have the power to escape. The rain answered by falling harder, drumming against the roof of her car like time itself was running out. The rain hammered against the brick wall like bullets tearing through fabric. Aria's body was crumpled on the wet pavement, her breathing shallow, each inhale sending white-hot pain through her ribs. One eye was already swelling shut. The other stared up at the stormy sky, unfocused, slipping toward darkness. Her grandmother's recipe book lay clutched against her chest, pages beginning to absorb the downpour. She had walked here on instinct, to the only place that felt like shelter, though she knew she had no right to ask for it. Lightning split the sky above Langford's restaurant, illuminating the alley where she lay. The thunder that followed sounded like the world breaking apart. Through the haze of shock and pain, Aria heard footsteps. Urgent. Running. A door burst open, light spilling across the wet pavement. Marco's voice, urgent and clipped, "Boss. Boss, you need to see this." Giovanni Bianchi appeared in the doorway, newspaper still in his hand from where he had been reading in his office. The paper fell. For one long second, he did not move. Then he was moving faster than a blade through silk, dropping to his knees beside her, his hands hovering over her injuries like he was afraid to touch her and make it worse. His face had gone completely still, the kind of stillness that comes before violence. "Aria. Aria, look at me." His voice was different, shaking with something that sounded like rage wrapped in ice. She opened her one good eye. Her voice came out broken, barely a whisper, "I'm sorry. I didn't know where else to. Do not apologize." "Who did this?" Each word came out clipped, lethal. "3 men. I don't know them. They said Douglas sent them. Said I don't know my place." Her words were slurring now, shock and pain medication already settling into her system courtesy of the adrenaline wearing off. "They said to consider it a lesson." Giovanni's jaw clenched so hard she heard his teeth grind. He lifted her carefully, one arm under her shoulders, the other supporting her legs, and carried her inside. Franco was already on his phone. Marco was running toward the stairs, shouting for the doctor they kept on retainer, the kind of doctor who did not ask questions and never kept records. The private room on the second floor smelled like leather and expensive cologne, but Aria could only smell her own blood. The doctor arrived in 12 minutes, moving with professional efficiency. Giovanni did not leave her side. He held her hand while the doctor examined her broken ribs, the fractured cheekbone, the bruises that were already darkening into maps of violence. His men had never seen him like this, gentle, careful, protective. Marco and Franco exchanged a look that said they were witnessing something unprecedented. When the pain medication began to work and Aria's eyes grew heavy, she whispered, "Emma. I don't want her to see me like this. I don't want her to be afraid." Giovanni leaned down, kissed her forehead with surprising tenderness. "She will not see you this way. You are staying with us until you heal. Not at a hotel. Here. In this house. Where we can protect you. I can't ask you to. You are not asking. I am telling you." His voice softened. "I failed to protect you. I knew Hale was dangerous and I did nothing fast enough to stop him. That ends tonight." He stood and walked to the doorway where Marco and Franco waited, their expressions tense. Giovanni's voice dropped to something lethal, something that sounded like the calm before a storm. "Find Douglas Hale. Find Sophie Langford. Find everyone who enabled what happened to her. But we do this the right way. Call Mitchell at the federal prosecutor's office. Tell him it is time to collect on the information we have given him over the years. I want documents, evidence, everything clean enough that they will never walk free." Marco blinked. In 15 years working for Giovanni Bianchi, he had never heard the boss choose the law over blood. "You want federal charges? I want him to understand that death would be mercy. I want him to watch everything he valued torn away one piece at a time. I want him to sit in a cell for decades knowing that his own actions destroyed him. That is the only justice that matters now." At 5:48 a.m. on Thursday morning, federal agents moved through Douglas Hale's modest house in Glendale like ghosts in tactical gear. The front door exploded inward. Douglas was drinking coffee in his kitchen, still in his bathrobe, when 12 agents surrounded him, weapons drawn. "FBI. Get on the ground. Hands where we can see them." He dropped the mug. It shattered on the tile like his life was shattering. "What is this?" "I haven't done anything. There's been a mistake. Douglas Hale, you are under arrest for assault, conspiracy to commit assault, labor violations, wage theft, sexual harassment, and obstruction of justice." The agent's voice was flat, mechanical, indifferent. His rights were read while two others snapped handcuffs over his wrists. His wife screamed from upstairs. His children were crying. The neighbors were watching from their windows. Outside, news cameras were already assembled. Giovanni had made sure of that. Every local channel would broadcast footage of the manager of an upscale restaurant being led away in his bathrobe, FBI agents carrying boxes of evidence from his home. 18 months of investigation, all of it airtight. Douglas was trembling like a cornered animal, begging, "Please, I have a family." I didn't mean, but no one was listening. No one cared about his excuses. His wife was asking why the FBI was in her home. His children would ask questions he could never answer truthfully. At the federal courthouse, the prosecutor laid out the charges with devastating precision. 40 years without possibility of parole. Douglas collapsed in court, sobbing, understanding finally that he had not been caught by chance. He had been collected. Systematically. Completely. Meanwhile, across the city, Sophie Langford was preparing for the most important event of her social season. Los Angeles magazine was covering the opening day brunch at Langford's. The society photographers were already positioning themselves. Wealthy patrons were beginning to arrive. She was radiant, confident, the perfect image of old money elegance in a cream-colored dress that cost more than Aria made in a year. Then the FBI arrived. The agents moved through the dining room with purpose, their arrival sending shockwaves through the crowd of influential people she had spent years cultivating. The lead agent's voice was steady, official, final. "Sophie Langford, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, labor law violations, theft, and obstruction of justice." Her face went white. "This is absurd. My father will sue you. Do you know who I am? We know exactly who you are. We also know about the scheme to frame employees for theft so they could not come forward with complaints. We know about the wage theft, the sexual harassment you covered up, the retaliation against anyone who tried to speak up. We have emails, financial records, and testimony from 12 former employees." The photographers were snapping pictures. Her carefully constructed image was being destroyed in real time, broadcast live on every local news channel. She screamed as the handcuffs went on, screamed as she was led past the society crowd she had worked so hard to impress, screamed as her world collapsed around her in front of 200 witnesses. The investigation moved forward with federal precision. Health inspectors arrived at Langford's that afternoon and found violations, dozens of them, all documented, all damning. Business licenses were suspended. The restaurant's reputation evaporated. Her father tried to intervene, tried to use his connections, but the case was airtight. Federal prosecutors had been building it for 18 months with information that Giovanni Bianchi had provided quietly, methodically, building the foundation brick by brick. At trial, the evidence was overwhelming. Sophie was sentenced to 15 years for conspiracy, fraud, and labor violations. Her trust fund was frozen to pay restitution to victims. Her designer clothes were replaced with prison uniforms. Her penthouse was sold. Her social circle abandoned her like she had never mattered at all. She sat in a federal prison cell, watching the woman she had tried to destroy heal, watching the man she had tried to manipulate protect someone she had deemed disposable. Justice was not death. Death would have been too quick, too easy, too merciful. Justice was watching everything you valued stripped away while you sat powerless, watching it happen one piece at a time, understanding finally that your own cruelty had built the walls around you. A week after the raid, Aria could walk without stabbing pain in her ribs. The swelling in her face had gone down enough that she could see clearly out of both eyes. Giovanni had kept her in his home, in a guest room overlooking the Pacific Ocean, and Emma had visited every single day. The child brought drawings, sat on the edge of the bed, talked about colors and stories and the way the ocean looked when the sun was low. Aria found Giovanni in his study late one night, the city lights of Los Angeles spread below them like fallen stars. He looked up from the papers on his desk, and something in his expression shifted, softened, turned toward her like she was the only thing in the room that mattered. "They're gone," Aria said quietly. "Both of them. What you did, What you made happen. They did it to themselves, Giovanni replied. I merely ensured the consequences found them. She sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap. Thank you. But I can't stay here. This isn't my world. This life, this protection, it's not sustainable. When it ends, when you move on to someone else, it will destroy me because I'll have gotten used to being safe. And I can't afford that kind of breaking. Giovanni stood and moved toward her, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. Who says it has to end? The question hung between them, heavy and impossible. Aria's eyes filled with tears she did not let fall. People like you don't stay with people like me. The world doesn't work that way. I am not leaving you, Giovanni said, and his voice was steady as stone. I have told you this. But Aria was already planning her escape, already building the wall she knew how to build. That night, while the house was quiet and Giovanni slept, she sat at the kitchen table with her grandmother's recipe book open before her. The pages were still damp from the storm, the ink in the margins slightly smudged but still readable. She picked up a pen with hands that trembled, and on the back pages where her grandmother's recipes ended, Aria began to write. Not a goodbye. Not an explanation. Just the truth, her handwriting shaking as she confessed things she had never let herself speak aloud, how his gentleness had terrified her, how his protection had made her believe in a future she did not deserve, how loving him meant watching him eventually see her for what she really was. A woman with nothing. A woman who would only drag him down. When dawn began to break over the Pacific, Aria placed the letter on his desk, her backpack already packed with everything she owned. She left the grandmother's recipe book open to the page where she had written, its worn leather cover open like an honest wound. The front door closed quietly behind her, and she disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness of Los Angeles, walking away from the only person who had ever made her feel like she was not invisible. But what she did not know was that Giovanni had been awake since 3 a.m, watching her move through the house from the shadows. He had read the letter as soon as she finished writing it. And even now, as she disappeared into the city streets, he was already moving toward the garage, already calling Marco, already beginning the process of finding her, not to force her to stay, but to prove to her that some men do not give up when it gets difficult. Some men choose to fight for the woman they love. Even if she is running. The sun had not yet broken over the Pacific when Aria sat at Giovanni's kitchen table with her grandmother's recipe book open before her. 3 a.m. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of the ocean, like a heartbeat beneath the city. She picked up a pen with hands that trembled, and on the back pages where her grandmother's recipes ended, where the margins were filled with faded handwriting and cooking measurements, Aria began to write. Not a goodbye. Not an explanation. Just the truth, her handwriting shaking as the pen moved across the page. Giovanni, by the time you read this, I will be gone. She paused, listening to the silence. The kitchen was beautiful in a way her old apartment never was. Marble counters, expensive appliances she did not know how to use, windows that overlooked the city lights stretching toward the horizon. She thought about Emma asking for her at dinner. She thought about Giovanni's hand finding hers in the darkness. She thought about how easily she could disappear into this life and lose herself completely. The pen moved again. I need you to understand that this is not about gratitude. I am grateful beyond words for what you have done, for the justice you brought, for the safety you gave me. But I cannot stay. Your world is one where violence is currency, where Emma will grow up knowing her father's name inspires fear. I cannot become another person who needs your protection, another responsibility you carry. I have been invisible my whole life, and maybe that is what I am meant to be. You and Emma deserve someone who belongs in your world, someone who can stand beside you without crumbling. I am not that person. Her vision blurred. She blinked hard, forced herself to continue. What I feel for you is too big, too overwhelming, and if I stay I will lose myself in it. Please do not look for me. Please let me go. Tell Emma I am sorry. Tell her the storm will pass and she is far stronger than she thinks. The same is true for you. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. Love, Aria. She folded the letter with deliberate care, tucked it into the recipe book at the page where her grandmother's recipes ended and blank pages began. The worn leather cover closed like a secret being kept. She left it on the marble counter where he would find it, where the kitchen light would catch the water stains on its cover. Aria moved through the house in the darkness. The backpack she had packed sat by the front door, containing everything she owned, new clothes Giovanni had insisted on buying, the $35,000 check he had given her that she still had not cashed, and the recipe book that held a lifetime of secrets. She picked it up, felt its familiar weight in her hands. The front door closed quietly behind her. No sound. No alarm. Just the soft click of the lock engaging and then nothing but the Los Angeles night, stretching empty and infinite before her. She walked down the street toward the bus station, where at 3:30 in the morning she could buy a ticket to anywhere, disappear into the grey pre-dawn the way she had learned to disappear her whole life. But what she did not know was that Giovanni had been awake since 2:45, listening to her move through the house from the darkness of the hallway. He had watched her sit at the kitchen table. He had seen her write, seen her hand shake, seen her carefully place the recipe book where he would find it. He had read the letter the moment she finished, standing in the shadows of the kitchen as she packed her backpack, as she walked toward the door. And even now, as she disappeared into the city streets, he was already moving toward the garage. He found Marco pacing near the black SUV, phone to his ear. The lieutenant took one look at his boss's face and the devastation written there and understood immediately that something had changed. Something irreversible. She left, Giovanni said quietly. Marco lowered his phone. When? Moments ago. Check the bus station on 5th Street, the train station downtown. She has money now but she does not trust it yet. She will go somewhere familiar, somewhere she has been before. Check the shelter on 5th, the parking lot where she used to sleep in her car, the gas station on Wilshire where she used to wash in the bathrooms. His voice was steady but his hands were clenched so tightly his knuckles had turned white. She is on foot. She does not have her car yet. Marco was already mobilizing men through the phone, speaking rapid Italian, giving orders. But Giovanni was already moving toward the driver's seat. Franco appeared from the house, buttoning his jacket. Boss, maybe she needs space. Maybe she needs to know that I am not leaving her. That I meant what I said. Giovanni's voice cut through the pre-dawn darkness like a blade. Move. He drove through the sleeping city as the sun began its slow burn over the horizon, checking every place she had mentioned in their conversations. The gas station where she used to wash up before work shifts, the attendant had not seen her. The parking lot near the pier where she had slept in her car for 3 months straight, empty except for a few other vehicles with people inside them who were surviving in silence. The shelter on 5th Street, they had not seen her. His phone rang. Marco. Nothing yet, boss. We are checking the train station now. He was about to respond when a memory surfaced. Something she had said once in passing, so quietly he had almost missed it. My grandmother used to take me to the beach at dawn. She said it was the only time the world was quiet enough to hear yourself think. Giovanni turned the SUV toward Santa Monica. The streets were empty at this hour, just delivery trucks and early morning joggers and the city in that strange liminal space between night and day. The beach parking lot had only a handful of cars. He parked and walked down toward the water, his expensive coat catching the salt wind. He saw her sitting on the sand, her backpack beside her, watching the waves. She did not turn when he approached, but her shoulders tensed. She had known he would come. Some part of her had always known. Giovanni sat beside her, both of them facing the ocean. The waves rolled in with the sound of 1,000 whispered confessions. Long silence stretched between them, filled only with the wind and the water and the sound of the city waking up behind them. You forgot your letter, he said finally. Aria turned slightly. Her eyes were red, her cheeks tear-stained. I didn't forget. I left it for you. I read it. Every word. His voice was rough, like gravel being crushed beneath a wheel. And I am here to tell you that you are wrong about most of it. She looked away from him, back toward the horizon where the sun was breaking into pieces of gold and orange. Giovanni reached for her hand. She did not pull away. I have spent 20 years building walls, Aria. I have buried feelings so deep I forgot they existed. I have kept everyone at a distance except Emma because love is a weakness in my world. Something that can be exploited. Used against you. But then you caught my daughter on a staircase and you looked at me like I was just a man, not a monster. And for the first time since I was a child, I wanted someone to see me. Aria was crying harder now, her entire body shaking. I'm scared, she whispered. I'm so scared that I'll need you and then you'll leave, or worse, you'll stay and I'll watch your world destroy you and I won't be able to. I am not leaving. He moved closer, his hand finding her face with a gentleness that felt impossible in a man who had spent 2 decades ordering men into darkness. I will say it as many times as you need to hear it. I am not leaving. She leaned into his touch, careful of her healing bruises. What if I can't do this? What if I'm not strong enough for your world? Then we will find a different world, he said simply. One where you can breathe. One where Emma grows up knowing that strength is not about violence. It is about choosing to stay when everything tells you to run. He pulled her into his arms and she clung to him, her tears soaking through his shirt. The sun broke over the horizon in full force, golden light spilling across the water in a path that seemed to lead directly to them, 2 people no longer invisible, no longer alone. 3 months later, Aria sat in her small apartment near the beach, the recipe book open on her kitchen counter. This version was filled now with her own handwriting, new recipes she had created, notes in the margins about variations and techniques. Emma sat beside her on a stool, her small hands covered in flour, helping to make lasagna. Am I doing it right? Emma asked, her dark curls falling into her face. Perfect, Aria said, guiding her hands gently. Just like your great-grandmother taught me. Giovanni arrived early that evening, finding them in the kitchen. He watched for a moment from the doorway, his daughter laughing, Aria patient and present, sunlight streaming through the windows. Then Emma looked up and shouted his name and he joined them, letting Aria boss him around the kitchen, and realized this was what peace felt like. The ring on her left hand caught the light as she moved. The storm had passed. And Aria Hartley, who had once believed she was invisible, had finally learned to see herself the way Giovanni saw her. The way Emma saw her. The way the world saw her now, not as a girl who survived, but as a woman who chose to live. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to know that after the rain, the sky always clears. Thank you for staying with us until the very end.